Hi everyone, and a massive welcome to a very special episode here on InfoSec Live of the GRC experience, where we get to chat with leaders in the government risk and compliance space with a live Q&A for you, our industry audience. For those that are new to the channel, my name's Simon Lindstead. I'm the founder of the InfoSec Live community, and by sharing stories and best practice over the last few months, it's led to over 8,000 hours of our content being viewed on YouTube by you, our amazing subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or as Kerry's already done, buy me a cheeky coffee, we do have a few ways you can show your appreciation. First up, the ability to purchase super stickers in the YouTube chat if you'd like your question bumped up to the top, and 3 tiers of membership allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So please do like and subscribe. We do try to make these events as interactive as possible. So make sure you drop any questions in the chat if you're watching this live, and if you're watching the replay, please do let us know what you think and drop those questions in also. So, okay, here we go. Joined today by Michael Chaoui. Michael is the founder and CEO of Atlas One, an information security consultancy specializing in governance, risk and compliance, with deep knowledge in building and sustaining customer trust programs. And as Atlas One's principal consultant, Michael's experience has spanned across Big Four, FAANG, large multinational corporations, smaller public tech companies, and startups that grew at breakneck speed across various industries within the public and private sector. He works with clients by helping them build trust and security programs to not only protect their organization's data, but to also transform their GRC programs into business enablement functions. Love that bit, Michael. He takes a people-orientated approach when developing solutions and strategies to effectively manage risk and build programs that not only establish but sustain trust amongst all relevant stakeholders. He most recently served as BetterUp's head of GRC, having successfully designed and implemented a GRC program from the ground up, which enabled the organization to achieve SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, ISO 27001 certification, and set up the government business for success in their FedRAMP ATO journey. So I think we all agree, very excited. Let's bring him on. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Simon. How you doing?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on. You've thrown me with the new background since we spoke in the green screen room a minute ago. Looks very good. Quick thank you to everyone for tuning in the audience. Again, we want to make this as engaging and interesting as possible, so do please jump in with those questions. But for once, I'm going to try and be quiet, Michael, and ask you to tell our audience a bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Really excited to see how many folks are in the chat here. So my name is Michael Chaoui. I've been doing GRC now for about more or less 10 years. I started my career out as an IT auditor, performing Sarbanes-Oxley engagements and audits, SOC 2 Type 2 audits, so on and so forth in the public accounting space. And then I sort of moved into the commercial space, into industry with Panasonic Avionics Corporation, where I was an IT compliance analyst. So kind of on the other side of auditors, interfaced with external auditors, managed ISO 27001 programs, and then kind of took my journey from there over to Tenable, where I served for a little while building out everything from third-party risk management programs to that's where I started actually getting a lot of exposure to customer trust, as well as performing business impact analyses and so on and so forth. And from there, I actually, in my own masochistic sort of humor, decided to go to the Big Four. Did some time with Deloitte. It was a great experience, helping out some FAANG clients, basically revamping their entire security and privacy programs, or being a part of the team that did. And then sort of from there, joined BetterUp, where I served as, started out as a GRC program manager and kind of worked my way up over the course of 2.5 years. Did a lot of amazing work there. Built out a great team, super strong team, and got to work with some really, really amazing people who I still get to call a friend to this day. Took them through ISO 27001 certification, built a customer trust program from the ground up, which has proven to be truly a business enabler. So lots of stuff to look back on and
Do you know
share with whoever wants to hear
the
about
two
it.
things that really stood out in both what what you said there, and also in the intro that you sent me over as well, was two things. One was business enablement, which is something we don't hear enough about in the security industry, and also the word customer, or the statement customer trust. So I want to, before we get into some questions, thanks, Kerry. I can see you've dropped one in there. I'll come back to it in a second. Talk to me about what customer trust means.
Yeah. So customer trust ultimately boils down to the root of business, of just doing business. So everyone in the chat, everyone that watches this, take a moment and ask yourselves a very basic question, which is, would you do business with someone that you don't trust? Of course, the answer is going to be no, right? So these days, trust can come from different sources, so different inputs that would instill and sustain trust throughout a business relationship. And that could be anything from, ethics to responsible sourcing and supply chain management. But these days at the forefront, especially in the United States and in Europe, and now is increasingly being adopted across the world, you're seeing security and privacy start coming to the forefront.
Yeah.
And considering the fact that third-party risk is still one of the top 5 risks, at least in my opinion, and amongst a lot of other industry colleagues, third-party risk continues to be one of the top risks today. So when you're doing business with all these SaaS companies, some of them are startups, some of them are more mature, you want to ensure that you are able to obtain reasonable assurance in their security posture, either at the organizational level and then even at the product security level. So being able to effectively communicate that doesn't look like a drab, to use the candor, but
Yeah.
compliance isn't necessarily the sexiest thing out there. So if you're able to sort of transform what you do really well in security, turning that into a compliance program by documenting it adequately and mapping it to the appropriate frameworks, and then taking it another step further by putting it in a manner that can be articulated amongst external parties and even amongst your own field teams if they're effective enough. So it takes multiple angles as well. It's not just, some folks, they think customer trust programs means I can fill out a questionnaire super fast, or we just complete questionnaires at everyone's behest, right?
I was thinking to ask you if questionnaires were involved, so I'm glad you brought that up, Michael.
They're a part of the puzzle. I mean, they get the conversation started, especially amongst more mature organizations that have more standardized processes, right? Or third-party risk management programs. So questionnaires is where it starts. Where it continues to evolve is as you're interacting with customer security teams. So jumping on calls with them, addressing any of their concerns, if there are any, or even just like them seeing a face from security tells them that the company cares enough to have a fully dedicated security team, let alone a GRC professional on staff. So from there, I mean, it goes even further beyond that when you start talking about negotiating information security addendums in your contracts, your customer contracts. Typically, those security clauses or security addendums are actually a material piece of the contract.
Yeah.
So if you're found out of compliance, they could technically, in a lot of cases, they could rescind the contract altogether or terminate it, and then there might even be additional liability or damages that could be pursued in a legal manner. So I found myself negotiating with attorneys a lot in terms of navigating that conversation is a very sensitive topic as well, because at this stage in the sales cycle, they're really pressed for time, and it's actually extremely sensitive, and they're trying to reduce as many turns between attorneys as possible. So supporting legal teams in that capacity, in the sense that these attorneys typically are not technically able or like technically knowledgeable in the security realm. Some of them are, but even then, you might come in to see where they might have this hat on, where it's like, oh, I'm going to use the same controls as if it's an on-premise solution versus a cloud, like cloud service provider.
Yeah.
So if you're a cloud service provider, that game looks a lot different from a network architecture standpoint, from an infrastructural standpoint, and even from an application plane standpoint in some cases, right? So having those requirements that would be put forth to the vendor in this case, it's not applicable. But if you sign it and just say, yeah, we'll do it, then you're already out of compliance. So that's a very delicate area that that doesn't really get a lot of as much attention as it should. And then even in some cases, you have to convince customers to not. I've seen information security addendums as long as 60 pages, and that seems like a little bit of overkill. So
That seems like
simplifying that
sounds like
conversation and making the case.
the lawyers driving that, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. So approaching that topic and that conversation with the attorneys and sort of explaining to them why it makes more sense, instead of, hey, you're dictating these very granular controls. The security space is constantly changing. We might be moving to passwordless technology soon. So all those other addendums that say you must have passwords and they must be this long and they must have this and that, and it becomes out of date. And so being able to actually negotiate with them and saying, hey, listen, we're ISO certified. Your language here is pretty aligned to ISO. So like, let's just, simplify it, reduce it down to like a page where you're just basically talking about, we'll continue to uphold to ISO 27001 and best practice
Is a
standards.
lot of the skill there, Michael, being able to explain the technical to people who aren't perhaps very technical? And you mentioned earlier about the differences between networks and cloud, or on-prem networks and cloud. When you're dealing with attorneys and other people in finance, do you find it a special skill set to actually have those conversations?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's super special. I think it's one of those soft skills. I think it's one of those soft skills that people really have to adapt to. In fact, when I get asked what makes a GRC professional successful in their career, it's the ability to take complex technical language that even you might not fully, you couldn't ask me to build out an entire security architecture for a massive organization. That's just not my skill set.
No.
But my skill set is to speak to the architect and then basically break it down into layman terms or into digestible, a digestible format or vernacular for those that are outside of your space. So cross-functional partners and cross-functional communication and collaboration is really, really key. So if you're able to really water it down to where it needs to go to address it with the audience that it needs to be addressed with, that's really, really important. And then pinning down the why behind why it makes sense.
Yeah, it's knowing what open questions to ask, isn't it, and where to start digging to find out the information you want. I'm going to come back to the business enablement piece a bit later, because I think there's a bit of crossover there. We've had
Oh, yeah.
had a couple of questions, and they're both fairly similar, so I'm going to try and bring them in at the same time and ask them as one question. So Carey's first was just wondering how I can use some of my knowledge with GRC. He's recently done Jerry Ozier's GRC course, I know that for a fact, and his A+ and Linux knowledge to get jobs. And the other question, which might relate to that, is from Natamak Jean-Claude. Hi, Michael. If you were to start all over again, what would be your advice for a beginner looking forward to navigate the GRC roles? So kind of similar question. So let's talk about getting into the GRC space. What's important?
Well, I can tell you what's really important is, one, understanding the risk behind security. And the other thing that I would say is understanding business, because GRC in a sense is the cross section between business and security. You don't necessarily have to be a CISO before you have to start learning how to read profit and loss sheets,
Absolutely.
or understanding the business. So that's really what makes you successful. Now, if I was to go back and start all over, if you have programming knowledge and more on the technical piece side of things. Like that would have been something that I would have liked to have honed a little bit more on going into GRC. But typically what I see with a lot of security engineers, once you're a security engineer, you don't see a lot of them jumping ship over to GRC.
No.
And if they do, it's usually for interesting case-by-case reasons. And I say the technical point because, and here's why. Originally, GRC, the traditional route as it's known, are folks who are originally IT auditors, and so now you see there's more of an interest of technical folks with some technical capabilities trying to enter this into the profession, and that's great. And the reason why it matters now is because you see things coming out like infrastructure as code, like Terraform. Like if you know how to use Terraform, or you know how to automate these processes to run configuration scans or configuration assessments, or even automated audits in your environment, that gives you a massive leg up. It actually not only makes you a more dangerous professional, right? But it also, it also saves money for your company because they don't have to bring in as many external resources and expenditures. And in fact, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to pay you for those skill sets. Like you bring those skill sets to the table, they ought to compensate you for that, right? So if there are cost savings there, instead of bringing an external firm in, those costs, or at least a piece of those cost savings, could get reallocated to you as an individual and a team player because you're actually adding so much more value and impact. So those two, if I was to do it again, probably zero in on that sort of stuff.
And how do you see the market for people breaking into GRC at the moment? Do you see many jobs out there? If so, anything particular people should be focusing on for those first steps into it?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of. I've never seen a slowdown. And the nice thing about GRC, and this is actually for more junior roles, especially now with the downturn in the economy.
Yeah,
not a lot of companies are looking to hire GRC leaders, but more so they're actually trying to double down on folks that are just starting out or that are a little more senior and individual contributors who can actually mentor and train the more junior analysts. So plenty of jobs out there. If you wanted to start out the traditional route is to go into like a public accounting firm, like Big Four, mid-tier firms, regional firms, and start out in IT audit, or even and then transition into GRC. For those of you who are looking to break into GRC, if it's a junior role and you're just starting out and you have some IT background or you have some computer science background or programming background, apply for it.
Okay.
Apply for it. You can always learn about risk and all those other things that come along.
What about those of us who transition from previous careers? So, for example, I had governance, oversight, and control functions in a regulated financial services business in the UK, which included an awful lot of GRC responsibility, an awful lot of box ticking, as it was, and an awful lot of principles-based regulation, which still gives me nightmares to this day. Is there much to bring across from previous careers like that into this, or is there just a massive divide in the difference?
Not necessarily. There, with the emergence of enterprise risk management, it could be rather cross-functional. I mean, in the sense that if you understand risk and you understand the importance of compliance and you understand governance mechanisms and frameworks, you should be okay, as long as you're open to learning about the technology behind it.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to learn that piece, which I mean, in our careers collectively, we're students of life, right? It's always, you're never done learning.
Yeah.
So those transitions typically are actually a little bit easier because if you're able to translate like operational GRC, like GRC operations, like business operations, if you're able to translate that speak into collaborating with cross-functional partners,
yeah, I mean, from personal experience, I completely agree. I haven't got enough technical knowledge, but I can talk to the board. I can communicate things, but I just don't know enough to communicate. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to really brush up on the tech side. QA Billings has asked a question. Let me move you to the top so you don't disappear when I bring this up. Here we go. What if we are just starting out on our compliance journey? In your opinion, what are some foundational risk and or security roles, processes and policies we need to have in place? Good question.
Yeah, great question. Well, first, when you're going down this trajectory, if we're talking about a brand spanking new GRC program, or even just compliance, I mean, let's break the C out of the GRC for a second. You're likely a newer organization. There's no way you've been operating for 40 years and not having to comply with anything and not doing it that whole time. You got to look at what data is in scope. Is it healthcare data? Is it financial data? Like, what space are you in? What industry are you in? And then kind of going from there. So if you're once you've determined the type of data that you're dealing with, whether you're collecting it, storing it, processing it, transferring it, hopefully not selling it.
Yeah.
But from that point, you start at the top of the security requirements pyramid, which is regulation. What is the absolute, like, you have to meet this, otherwise you're not going to be able to operate.
Yeah. What, for example, GDPR in the UK? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or if you're in the financial sector, GLBA, if you're dealing with consumer financial data, or if you're dealing with healthcare data, lovely HIPAA, right? So you're taking it from the regulatory standpoint first, and then from there you work your way back. So from that point, you go to industry standard, like what is the general common standard practice that you have to abide by. ISO 27001 is a standard; it's not a regulation. So that's a good place to always start. I think it's a great foundational framework. It's a management system, right?
Does the framework depend upon the regulation, or does it not?
Sometimes, in some cases, it can. Like, there's a misconception that if you're ISO 27001 certified, you're GDPR compliant. Myth, right? If you're ISO 27001 certified, you're in a good, from the security requirements perspective of GDPR, you're probably pretty close, and there might be some gaps to fill. Some regulations, they respect certain frameworks, but they don't necessarily rely on them.
Okay.
It's a good, like, it's more of like a good indicator of where you're sitting. And then to go back to Wade's question, so understanding what your requirements are from the regulations, the standards, and then of course your own contractual obligations with your customers, like that also will make you sink or swim. And then so rolling back from there, and then from that has to be paired with the risk posed to the organization. Every organization has a different risk appetite.
Of course.
They're willing to take on more than others, or less than others, right? So whatever that risk appetite looks like, whatever that risk profile for the organization is, that's where you want to start plugging in. Okay, how heavily do we need to invest in compliance at this point?
Going back to my old financial services days, it's not just the appetite for risk; it's also the capacity for loss. A lot of the time, as well, isn't it?
Right. Like, how much, if ish hit the fan, what is the maximum tolerable amount of loss that you could actually take as an organization before you have to really start worrying? And some companies look at it and they say, yeah, we're fine with this crazy amount, and it might, cause eyes to widen in the room, but at the end of the day, that's on them as an organization.
Do you see more businesses now looking at, I suppose you could call it self-insuring in a way for some of these attacks anyway, where you're putting money aside or assets aside to cover that rather than taking out policies?
I'm really glad that you bring this up, because this is actually something that I've been reading up on quite a bit lately. So I think it was Lloyd's of London. They had said that, I think it was back in January.
They
had stated that many companies now are becoming uninsurable with respect to cybersecurity liability insurance. And that actually might be true. So, but at the end of the day, those premiums have if you were previously paying, let's say, $200,000 a year for your insurance premiums, now they've jumped to 1.8 million.
I have, yeah.
So you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, if we would just kind of transfer the risk and we said, if we get hit, we've got insurance. Well, how do you think your customers are going to
Yeah.
see that sort of attitude? So would you rather invest that 1.8 million into your cybersecurity, into your cyber liability insurance, or would you rather invest it in your security posture and actually?
I do wonder if that's the route we're going to see a lot of companies taking moving forward, because from my 20 years in the insurance industry, whilst there's data available for them to look at how to insure companies, it's so fast paced, it's so fast changing, and there just isn't enough data for these, I'll call them bean counters because that's what they are, to work out what a fair premium is for them as well. It's back to the risk versus reward argument, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, to add on to that, ransomware is still rampant. And there's actually separate ransomware premiums that companies have to pay. So okay, now you paid the 1.8, now you got to pay additional to even get ransomware protection. So it just doesn't make any sense anymore. I mean, it makes sense to a certain degree, but once you start hitting a certain amount, you really have to start considering, like, is this really worth it, or would we rather put the actual adequate protections in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about business enablement, because I've started to see that mentioned more and more over the last 12 months. Probably not enough, but let's frame it this way. So, a lovely document came out last week from the White House,
Hmm.
the national what was it? The National Cybersecurity Strategy document. There's been a really mixed response on LinkedIn, social media, mainstream media, as to whether this is actually any good, or whether it's, as my late nan would have said, all fur coat and no knickers. What what do you think, Michael?
Um, there are certain aspects of this of the strategy that I'm curious to see. It looks like they obviously got some subject matter expertise, like weighing
Yeah.
in on it, right? Um, how do I say this respectfully? It's a very formal document saying that this is a plan. We have a plan for a plan, because there hasn't been any legislation or actual forcible requirements that are coming down from the government. Um, and that's nice, but cool. I think the piece that has got a lot of people rattled right now is the liability and the accountability of software companies to actually ensure that their products are secure. And frankly, I don't know how the audience is going to take this one. Good,
Yeah.
about time. I think there's too many smoke and mirrors out there when it comes to security.
Yeah.
You see a lot of companies, when they do get popped, they get popped because of something really, really, really silly.
I mean, it's all you hear is supply chain risk. I mean, you mentioned third party risk, supply chain risk at the start of the conversation, and it's something that desperately needs addressing. We've got all of these products that haven't been built securely, being plugged in everywhere, left, right, and centre. Is there enough teeth in the document to actually force companies to do something about it?
No, they're pretty much just saying you're going to be held liable for it now. They're basically passing the accountability buck over, which is nice,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have that teeth that it really, really needs, which is going to be through legislation and regulation.
We just need
Um,
a couple of people to get their pants pulled down on it over the next year or two, and maybe people will start listening.
yeah, it's kind of like GDPR, they just
Yeah.
started just spanking people, and then they thought, oh, okay, this is serious. And this is the same thing that happened with GDPR. People
Yeah.
didn't really take it seriously at first, and then the fines started rolling out in the
Yeah.
millions and tens of millions, and now it's like, whoa, no, mess with that.
It's amazing how that stick works, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, in the GRC realm, I personally am not the type to walk around with the big stick. I like to take a more collaborative and kind of empathetic approach with users. But I will say this: I do have Thor's hammer in a break glass sort of case that I will bust
I
out.
think I had this same conversation with a CISO yesterday, who was talking about someone else's style being very much going in with a sledgehammer on every problem. And I think whilst it might not be everyone's style or appropriate every time, there's definitely a time and a place for Thor's hammer, Michael.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And trust me, I mean, I busted it out. I don't like busting it out. You know, it's kind of like you're trying to be the cool dad, but then you have to be a disciplinarian to an
Yeah,
extent. I mean, I don't have kids. I have
I,
no idea what that looks
I've
like,
got
but
6, and that's exactly how my life plays out every day. Yeah.
yeah.
Let's just bring this comment up from Q Wade Billings. Without legislation and regulation, executive memos are toothless and, in my experience, will be largely ignored. Seems to be what the common consent is there, I think. Thanks, Q Wade.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what, Wade, you know, Wade's he's got a great point there. I will bring this up. So it's not a regulation, it's not legislation, but it's something that a lot of companies are starting to get really excited about without really understanding what's involved and what's entailed. And that is a lovely, a lovely little ditty called FedRAMP.
Yeah.
So if you're a software company and you want to sell to the U.S. government, any agent, like most agencies, especially like Department of Defense, where people, you know, oh, it's sexy, it's military, it's, you know, that's all good and gravy. If you want to even get your foot in the door with selling contracts to the U.S. government as a cloud service provider, now you need to be FedRAMP authorized. And so that's not necessarily legislation or regulation, but it's certainly the expectation that becomes a really gross realization for a lot of folks that go down that path, thinking that it's like, oh, it's going to be just like ISO. No, it's
Have
not.
you seen an increase in businesses looking to achieve that then?
I have, yeah. There's a lot more buzz for it. I mean, if you even look at job postings, they'll say like, oh, you know, ISO, and if you have FedRAMP experience, that's great. That's kind of like a hint, hint, nudge, nudge. We're not going for it now, but as soon as you get here, we're gonna
That's what you're
suddenly
going to be
start going
doing.
for it. Yeah, yeah. So get ready, baby birdies, because it's
So
coming.
is that a service that you provide, Michael, at Atlas One?
You know, the FedRAMP space is a very lucrative space. I have experience with FedRAMP. It is not something that where it's not something where Atlas One is in a place right now to really go down. You know, I like to swim in my own lane and really double down on my own specialty.
Yeah.
It's also an incredibly complex journey for a lot of companies, especially those that are startups, right? Because it looks amazing to the business executives, but the amount of buy-in that it takes and the structuring of the company and the structuring of the business in order to make it viable, and the journey that it involves in terms of how mature your security program currently is or how mature your organization is as a
Yeah.
whole. It's a lot to navigate. It's not something that, you know, maybe down the line we delve into that space, but right now it's
Not
not
just
really
yet. Well,
something.
let me jump on your lane analogy. As someone who swims every day, I love that analogy. Talk to me about your lane. Talk to me about where you specialize.
So customer
Yeah.
trust, standing up GRC programs from scratch, and that involves everything from third-party risk management to just general program management, security awareness and training, make it fun, right?
Yeah.
A lot of organizations struggle with compliance in that area for some reason, but primarily bread and butter customer trust. We take a look at your entire security program as a whole, see what the posture is, see what certifications, frameworks, compliance mechanisms that you have in place, and then helping you essentially transform that. And then the business enablement piece comes in. This is where I get really excited.
Seamless, because that's the next topic. I'll let you carry on.
All right, excellent. So any information security program or information security function at any given company is often perceived as a cost center.
Yeah.
You cost so much money. Have we had any incidents? No. Okay. Well, cool. But you're still costing us a lot of money. Now here's the fun part. The customer trust programs actually are part of the business enablement piece. They're one of them. When you start becoming advisors, internal advisors to your cross-functional teams, that's another business enabler, but that's
Yeah.
more from an operational standpoint. in that, let's say you have engineers that are developing a new product and they say, hey, what are the security requirements? Because we're planning on collecting and aggregating this much data and storing it. And, can you help us out in like terms of understanding what security requirements are required? There's also international expansion. So if you have only AWS US regions, but you want to go sell in Europe, well, guess what? You're in for a rude awakening if you don't have an AWS instance stood up in the EU. And that trend is actually continuing in a variety of different countries, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE. I believe Australia is going to come out with it soon, Singapore.
Yeah.
Um, so advising them in that case, in that instance of like what the security and privacy requirements might look like around those international expansion opportunities, that's another business enabler. So acting as an advisor. Now the customer trust piece, you have field teams and sales teams that are going out and they're selling to their customers. And let's assume they're completely ignorant to the entirety of the security program. Let's just assume it. It's a safe assumption, I think. And at some point, whether it's early, mid, or late, the customer, many customers out there will have to go through a security due diligence process or a security review. And so what that often entails is, like I was mentioning before, the questionnaire, maybe they want to jump on calls, maybe they want to even propose the idea, the crazy and hilarious idea of performing their own audit on your company. Not going to happen. That's crazy. I'd be doing that all day. um, so going through that process is often, for a lot of sales teams, they get confused or they try to navigate that themselves, and then they end up shooting themselves in the foot because then it causes a lot of confusion. And now you're put in this position where they reach out to the security team and say, hi, help me, please. I kind of misspoke. And then you got to kind of clean up that mess. And it's not fun for anyone. And the objective of customer trust not only is to provide assurance to your customers and the external market and your other stakeholders, it's also internally intended to increase sales velocity. So let's say company wants this extensive questionnaire, a SIG, to be filled out. What is that,
Yeah.
like 400 questions? Well, hey, we already have a SIG. Here you go. Same questions. Oh, lovely. We don't need to do this. You just saved yourself about a week, 2 weeks worth of work if you're a small team. Let's say you have a killer customer trust portal. It's got all these FAQs, all this information, displays your badges, and it's got like, your pen test executive summary. They just have to sign an ENDA in order to access all these private assets. They see all of this, and I've countless times I've had this happen, where the customer, you shoot them the link, they open it up. Yep, this looks good. Never mind. Don't worry about the questionnaire. You just saved yourself at least a week of additional rumbling and bumbling. And that's just for you to complete the questionnaire. For them to review it and come back with follow-ups, that could extend into another few more weeks. Now, in a given quarter, if you really want it, this is when you put the business hat on as a security professional. Within a given quarter, every week counts, every day counts, in fact. And so sort of empathizing with your fellow sales reps is something where you really understand the sense of urgency. And when you understand the sense of urgency and the problem itself, and then you put in the solutions to fix them, and you give them those boosters that they need towards the end of the quarter, I'm telling you, all you security folks out there, whether you're in GRC or outside of it, if you're involved in any way with customer trust program, you're going to be their hero.
Yeah.
Unsung, probably. Very likely unsung, but you're still a hero.
Let me look at this from a different angle then. So at the moment, we're seeing an awful lot of acquisitions going on in the industry, and with over 4,000 products in this space, I'm not terribly surprised. And I would think that would continue strongly for the rest of this year and beyond, with the amount of new ones that are coming on every day. Do you advise VCs and private equity firms with regards to potential purchases, or is that something that you're looking to do?
That is something I have some experience with. So M&A due diligence, of course, you want to make sure that their security posture and privacy posture is adequate, at least at a baseline level. I mean, especially if you looking into buying a very novel startup,
yeah,
chances are maybe not. But the ones who are really smart and they want to go down the ACK route will actually put that in place in the beginning, because the last thing that you want is to acquire a company that has poor security posture, didn't cover that in your due diligence process, at least not not adequately, as granularly as you could have.
Yeah.
And now you're finding yourself having to invest a ton of money in either building up that security program or having them absorb your security controls, because that's still a lot of work. Or in worst case scenario, they get popped, or they got popped and they didn't disclose it to you, or
Yeah.
you didn't find it. So yeah, that's something that I've advised on previously. There's multiple approaches to take. It doesn't have to be super painless. And guess what? That's another business enabler. If you have an internal growth function that's looking to acquire other companies or merge or anything, any mergers and acquisitions, if they know to tap on security and privacy's shoulder and say, hey, can you help us with just at least a standard checklist to like go through, you're already taking a step in the right direction.
I asked the question because about 4 weeks ago now, I won't mention names, I had a conversation with a fairly large multinational who acquire companies' tech stacks and then improve them and put their own tech stacks in. And a lot of that is done through acquisition. And they approached me to be put in touch with someone about getting pen tests done for these firms to see where they were. And the conversation went off on a bit of a tangent because from my own limited experience, it wasn't really a pen test that these companies needed, but more of a thorough look through of their entire security processes and policies. But again, I think they'd approached some fairly large, maybe big four type companies for quotes, and they'd been so horrified with the answers they got that they were looking around for different options. And again, I mean, that's another point, that the pen testing side of the industry seems to be the one that everyone talks about, the one that everyone gets excited about. And also it's becoming a bit of an issue, especially for small and medium businesses who are now looking to adopt security when they actually think what they need is a pen test. And again, it's back to the education piece, isn't it? And maybe if we could iterate to the leaders of these businesses how important the governance, risk and compliance, which they probably already got some form of within the organization, and start relating that to them when it comes to security, I think the industry would be in a much better place with more businesses engaging, my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one. I mean, pen test isn't the end all be all. Pen test is a point in time. They're
Yeah.
typically done once a year with most companies. Um, and there's often it's not the only way to manage your vulnerabilities or identify vulnerabilities, right? You could have vulnerability management programs, put your scanners in, run those regularly, and then prioritize them based on the risk and the capacity of the engineering teams, right? Or whoever the heck built it, right? If you build it, you fix it.
Yeah.
Um, I find a lot of small and medium enterprises that have built out their products. Typically, you want to move as fast as you possibly can. Like that's the thing. You got to ship quickly. You got to ship quality. But that's the problem. When you want to move fast and break shit, as Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook so eloquently put it, you're gonna find yourself after a while with a bunch of glass on the floor, and
Are
you're
you
probably
talking
gonna
about the
step on.
metaverse here, Michael?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. No, I'm not gonna dive into that. But yeah, you can incur a lot of technical debt, and when that technical debt is built out by an entire, by the engineers, there's nothing wrong with that. Technical debt is technical debt, but you got to fix it at some point, and you don't want to do it at a point where you're so big that the reverse engineering it is just not practical at that point, or it's extremely difficult, or you're going to find yourself having to rebuild the entire product. And so I see there's like this apprehension of adopting vulnerability management programs, or running the very first pen test, or running the very first full blown web app scan, or anything of that nature, because they already know that there's going to be a ton of vulnerabilities.
It's the
That's not
ostrich
the
approach, isn't it?
right. It's not that, oh, we're so embarrassed we have so many vulnerabilities. It's not that. It's the apprehension comes from, okay, great, we got all these vulnerabilities. Now, where are we going to find the time to fix them?
Well, this goes back to a comment that Stephen Dick made a second ago. the main reason he thinks his current place is doing a pen test is solely because of insurance. And I think that the insurance piece is driving businesses to do those snapshot in time assessments to get them through the insurance process. But it's not really getting businesses to engage with security, is it? Because as you rightly said, it's great. Do a pen test. A firm who hasn't got a security department or perhaps an IT department, you get this massive report telling you where everything's gone wrong. Then who's going to fix it? You've got no one within the organization to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of like pointing out. It's kind of like it's like pointing at the problem and saying there's a problem
Yeah.
to a bunch of people in the room that know there's a problem and they know what the problem is, but you're not coming with any solutions and you're not coming with any sort of tactical execution plan
No.
to remediate all this.
No, I completely agree. We've got a couple of questions here from Jennifer. Thanks for tuning in, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for your time today. I'm not sure if you've responded to these questions already. Question one, what is your take of GRC in cloud computing? We'll take that one first.
Yeah. Would love if there would be a little bit more specificity on
I
that.
thought you might say that. Yeah. Okay, let's do the second one then. How do you communicate the value proposition of security and GRC to a business decision maker when, hold on, I'll read it on here. Decision maker when designing a cloud architecture. There we go. There's the meat around the bones for that question, I think.
All right, cool. Thank you for the question. So if you're designing a cloud architecture, I'm assuming this is like for a very, let's just assume that it's for a very new company,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of building out their architecture from the very beginning. From a security and GRC standpoint, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about if you just kind of start building stuff and you don't have security in mind, the value proposition is not so much how is it going to add value today. It's more about how it's going to prevent you from having to spend a load of money later.
Remediating your mess. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to security, like between proactive and reactive approaches, the more proactive you are without overkill, right? I'm not saying, give me millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of budget. I'm going to hire a 20-person team for a 200-person company. I'm not saying that. Right. But if you understand the data that is going to be within that architecture, what that entire layout looks like, how many third parties you're going to have, where is data going to be stored, how is it going to be stored, so on and so forth. Just asking the right questions first, and then make your value proposition to the business decision makers. There's nothing that irks me more than a consultant that sort of that makes blind recommendations.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you want to do. You come in and you're the GRC guy and you start mouthing off that, these items here are massive risks. They will just destroy the entire
Not
company.
winning friends and influencing people that way, are you, Michael?
No, you're not. Yeah, you got to understand the context of the organization. And so when you understand the context of the organization, now you're moving in the right direction, because now you're starting to understand what makes sense from a risk standpoint, like from a risk appetite standpoint, and how you're going to mitigate and manage that risk. So that's the value proposition there. Is I'm in my little crow's nest with my little I don't know, telescope or binoculars or whatever you want to call it.
Spyglass, I think,
Pick a thing, with my little spyglass. I'm going to do that for you. And I'm going to stay abreast of all the changing regulations and all the changing requirements that might be coming down the pike. And I'm going to partner with you guys along the journey. And we're going to have a security function that makes sense for the business. That's the value proposition. It shouldn't come in with this heavy-handed, like we're going to secure the crap out of the organization. It's got to be a partnership. It's always got to be a partnership. That's the value. Partnership. Without partnership, there is no business enablement.
No, but then look, the whole way you're positioning your business with the customer trust and the business enablement, I wouldn't say is the same as most GRC companies out there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where the focus needs to be to get businesses to engage properly. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I know we've got a few people in the audience who are looking to break into GRC. We covered off that a little bit at the start, but let's come back to it. Catherine's asked a quick question. What are the kind of job titles that match the GRC area when they don't mention GRC within the title or description? That's a very good question, Catherine.
That's a very good question. I love this question. Thank you, Catherine. It could be IT compliance. It could be risk and compliance. It could be security and compliance. It comes under, basically just break out the words under GRC into their own individual things and keep an eye out for that. So IT, I've seen IT governance analysts, IT policy analysts, IT risk analysts, IT auditor. Sometimes that is used interchangeably by some companies. Is it correct? It's up to them. So yeah, so that's what I would keep an eye out. So risk and compliance analyst, even in some cases, security analysts, they might even involve some GRC work as well.
Okay. Next question. Next question from me then. What are the main skills you need if you want to break into GRC?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a really broad question. I thought I'll definitely keep you talking for 5 minutes on this one, Michael.
Yeah. So the main skills that you need for GRC, I mean, other than the obvious, like within this basic understanding of security and IT, yeah. I'm going to focus on the soft skills here on this one, and I hope that's okay with everyone here in the audience, because I really emphasized this. I emphasized it to when I was hiring my team, when I was asked the question, and I'm going to say the same thing here. Cross-functional communication and collaboration. I'm going to double down on that one, and here's why. Oftentimes, GRC is a highly cross-functional function. You're dealing with everyone in the organization for the most part. You're dealing with HR, you're dealing with legal, you're dealing with product teams, you're dealing with engineering. That's usually where there's a lot of pain points in terms of relational dynamics. I've worked with some amazing engineers over my career, so I've been very fortunate. But I've also experienced. I've come into environments where there was a lot of friction. There was a lot of work that needed to be done there. So when I say cross-functional collaboration and communication, one, understand your audience. If you're talking to a lawyer, speak to them like you would speak to a lawyer.
Yeah.
Speak their language to an extent, right? I'm not saying you have to go back to law school. If you're speaking to engineers and you need something done, because they're usually the builders and they're usually implementing a lot of these controls, especially within like SDLC and so on and so forth. Give them the requirements as specifically as you possibly need to, and give them time. Don't tell them you need it done tomorrow. Don't tell them you need it done in a week. That is not cool, because these guys have planned sprints. So just being really empathetic as a partner, and in the sense that you need to understand that they have their own business priorities and not everything is reliant on
you need to understand what drives them and what challenges they have as well.
Exactly. And so you don't just come to them and say, any function for that matter, ask them what is a reasonable timeline, give them what you're hoping for, ask for it, unless it's a serious emergency, then that's a totally different situation. But for the most part, run-of-the-mill everyday things, have that negotiation. It's really a negotiation. And don't tell them that, hey, we need to do this because ISO said so, or we need to do this because SOX said so. That's not how you do it.
No.
You got to come to them and tell them, this is the why. You got to start with why. Simon Sinek nails this beautifully in his book. But you really do have to start with why. You have to explain the risk to them, and what we're mitigating it and how we're mitigating it, and what the value add of this is in the long run. If it's a process improvement, especially, and it's going to make their lives easier, yeah, there's a little bit of pain right now, but in the long run, it's going to be better. that is going to not only get their buy-in, but you're going to also earn their respect, and they're going to actually enjoy working with you in the future. Not because they love GRC and everything that there is around security, but because they actually appreciate the fact that your MO is to protect the organization and the people therein.
I think for people who struggle to get those points across, there was a technique that I was taught about 30 years ago, which involves three little words, which is which means that. And I think if you remember that in communications with people and you actually explain in layman's or their terms what the problem is, why you're solving it, and how it's going to benefit them, yeah, you're already miles ahead. For I suppose it's not even a sales pitch. There's a free course actually on soft skills in the InfoSec Live community, which you can access for free. It's something I put together last year that helps you with mirroring, body language, empathetic listening, talks about active listening, talks about dialogue over conversation and what a dialogue actually is, and also gives you some tips and tricks, whether you're going through an interview or whether you're just trying to build better relationships with people. Is something that I put together based on my own experience. So please take advantage of it, anyone, if you think it would help. Michael, we're pretty much out of time. Is there any final message you want to give before I wrap things up?
For everybody here, everybody watching, thank you so much for joining. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or even schedule coffee chats with me, pick a brain. I'm here for you.
Amazing, thank you. I'm just going to drop your LinkedIn in the chat. So yeah, Michael, it's been amazing. There's some great feedback in the chat as well. I think you've really helped a few people on here today. You've definitely helped open my eyes a little bit to it too, and I'm looking forward to catching up again. For anyone who's in Florida, on March the 30th, I'm hosting the first US in-person event for the CISO experience on InfoSec Live in Tampa Bay. There's a live panel debate with a couple of CISOs, and we're focusing on the new National Cybersecurity Strategy document and also the SEC guidance that came out recently about CISOs being on board. So if anyone's around in that area and wants to attend, please do reach out. Michael, have an amazing day. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing today. And I hope to catch up with you all very, very soon. Take care.
Thanks, Simon.
Cheers,
Appreciate
everyone.
it.
Bye.
Cheers.